Okay, go ahead, Abby.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. Like Ellen said, my name is Abby Kirkman. I am the Assistant Director of the SAMHSA SOAR Technical Assistance Center, which is based at Policy Research Associates. And I live and work in upstate New York, but I serve as the liaison to the state of Pennsylvania and have for about 6 or 7 years at this point. I have been with the SOAR TA Center. It will be 12 years this October. So I'm really well versed in SOAR and implementation. So what we're going to do today, many of you may be familiar with SOAR. I'm sure you've heard it through the grapevine. And as some of you know, having it be a requirement, many of you are probably pretty familiar with it. However, what we're going to do today is really get a little bit more into the nuts. We are going to provide an overview of what SOAR is, how to become involved for those that are newer. And then we're going to talk about some outcomes, some nuts and bolts of how communities have done successful SOAR initiatives, and really talk about how you as a community can get involved in some next steps that you can take. So I've got about 35 slides or so, and I'll stop at certain places for Q&A. But let's go ahead and get started. So before we get started, just a brief disclaimer that the views, opinions, and content expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, and content of SAMHSA, CMHS, or HHS. You can tell I've done that a couple times. So what we're going to do today, again, is provide a brief overview of SOAR and the SOAR process. We're going to talk about the SOAR critical components and how it's different from the traditional process, and then share how communities have implemented SOAR, and then we'll have ample time for question and answer. So one of the values of the SOAR TA Center is that we really provide A to Z technical assistance. So we are experts in the Social Security disability process, not just the SOAR process. And I think it's important to understand that SOAR is a process, not a program. So it is a process of helping people apply for Social Security disability benefits. And to that end, we hear from people all day, every day who are in need of applying for benefits. And then we also are able to give presentations like this and talk to communities about how they can implement this initiative to help those who are most in need in their community. So let's kick it off with just the basics. What is SOAR? SOAR stands for SSI, SSDI, Outreach, Access, and Recovery. It is a model, it is a method of assisting people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness, who are unable to work due to severe and persistent mental or physical health disabilities that often co-occur, apply for Social Security disability benefits. We're sponsored by SAMHSA, and we have operated the SOAR Technical Assistance Center since 2009. And we've worked in collaboration with Social Security since 2005. So SOAR has been around for a really long time. And by virtue of where the TA Center is and where it started in upstate New York, Pennsylvania was one of the very early adopters, because you are merely a couple hours away. We were able to go down and do a lot of implementation meetings. So many of your communities are probably very familiar with SOAR in the process, and you have had ebbs and flows with it along the way. So all 50 states, including the District of Columbia and also some territories, participate in the SOAR process, even though there is no direct funding for SOAR. So one of the number one things we get asked is, how can we fund this? This sounds great, but how do we go about doing it? And while we're going to touch on that a little bit today, I could talk for days about how communities have successfully funded SOAR. But at the end of the day, we are looking at getting those who are most vulnerable, who are having trouble accessing having trouble getting timely access to benefits on Social Security disability much more quickly. So next slide, I just want to do a little bit of level setting to make sure that everyone is familiar with the two programs. You guys are probably very familiar with this, and it is old hat. But when we are applying for Social Security disability benefits for someone, we are always going to apply for both programs. We have the Supplemental Security Income, or SSI, and then Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI. SSI may be one that you are more familiar with if you are working with individuals who lack a work history or are homeless or at risk. This is a needs-based system or program, and it comes with a federal benefit rate of $914 a month. You would not get any more than that if you are on SSI. Now, this does, because it is needs-based, it does take into account income and resources and living arrangements. And essentially, if you do not need it, you will not be eligible for it. And this SSI is based on a protective filing date, not necessarily the date of onset. And then, as we know, Medicaid is generally provided with SSI. Now, what folks may be more familiar with if you work with people who have a work history, or someone within your family may have pulled from this, Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI. Now, SSDI is a Title II program, and it comes from, Title II is known as RSDI, so Retirement Survivors Disability Insurance. So survivors benefits come from this pot, retirement comes from this pot, and disability insurance based on someone's work history. So eligibility will be based on if someone has paid into the system, if they have worked those 40 qualifying credits and have worked within the last 5 years, and it will be based on the amount that they have paid in. So it's not a one-for-one match. It is not as if we say, okay, well, we've put in millions of dollars, so we're going to get millions back. This is going to be a prorated based on that. So the monthly amount may vary. And the date that someone becomes eligible is going to be based on the date of their onset of their disability, and there may be a 5-month waiting period depending on when that is. And then Medicare is provided along with that after a 2-year waiting period, which again does not need to be 2 real years. But when we are applying for Social Security disability, Social Security via SOAR, we are going to apply for both always, because our folks may be not great. They might not be good historians. They might not have good memory. They can have a very robust work history, but are telling us up front, I don't have that work history. So we really want to make sure that that's accounted for. Now, one of the other key things that I want to talk about is the definition of disability, because this, I think, is what really trips people up. So some people, and I think a lay person in general, may assume that I have a disability. My doctor or a doctor has given me a diagnosis, therefore I have a disability. I would be eligible for benefits. But that isn't how it works with Social Security. Yes, you have to have a medically determinable physical or mental health impairment. But there's 2 other aspects of the disability definition that enable someone to be eligible for benefits. And this is why most applications fail. So in order to be found eligible for benefits by Social Security, you have to have a medically documented physical or mental health diagnosis. And it has to be relatively recent. It has to have lasted or be expected to last 12 months or more, or result in death. And it needs to severely impact the applicant's ability to function and work up to what is known as substantial gainful activity, or SGA. And this number will move and fluctuate every year mostly. And the SGA amount for 2023 is going to be $1,470 a month. So when we are going to apply for both of these benefit programs, the first question Social Security will ask is the person working? Do they have a severe disability? Is it expected to last 12 months or more, or result in death? And are they earning SGA? If they are earning over substantial gainful activity, if someone's earning $2,000, $3,000 a month, they will be denied automatically because they are not eligible based on their earnings of SGA. Now, there can be some nuances here, but this is the overall general rule of it. But if they're working under SGA, or they're not working at all, then they would move on and be able to go into the determination of disability, which we can talk a little bit more about later. But I think one of the challenges that most people have is when they're working with applicants, the applicant may say, well, I am disabled, I have this diagnosis, but then they don't go that step further, and they don't provide the information, both medically and functionally, that shows that they are not able to work and earn SGA. If Social Security can identify 3 jobs that an individual can do in the entire national economy, it comes from this book called it's not a physical book, but the Dictionary of Occupational Titles, then the person is found to not be disabled. So that's really where most of the things fail, but that's where SOAR is so effective. We work at documenting the applicant's functional limitations and why they're not able to work and earn SGA. Okay, so I want to get back to a little bit about SOAR and what we do. So the SOAR online, we have 2 SOAR online courses, and this enables folks to be able to work with both children and adults. We really recognize the importance of working with SOAR across the lifespan. So the SOAR process can assist children. So this would be individuals that are under the age of 18. Children are eligible for SSI only. And so it is not the same definition for adults as it is for children, because presumably children do not have an extensive work history, though some may. So this is going to compare a child's functioning, the child who has a disability, to that of a lay child that does not have a disability. We also recognize that there is a kind of a group of individuals in between children and adults. So this is the youth and youth in transition. So transition age youth, and that's going to be the 18 to 24. Now they are going to be evaluated under the adult definition of disability, but applications are but it's very important to understand that where you get the applicant's records, how we will show that the applicant is not able to work, even if they don't have a robust work history, is going to be very different. And then we have this adult population, which is what many of us here on the call may work with. And these are going to be people who are eligible for both SSI and SSDI. And that's where the definition of disability is really going to come in. So thinking about with your agency, who do you serve and where can you help kind of along the SOAR continuum? But what we also recognize is that SOAR is just one brick in the foundation. Access to Social Security disability benefits is just one piece of stability. If you look down here at the kind of lower left-hand corner of the house, you'll see that that's where SSI and SSDI benefits are. We all pay rent, we all pay a mortgage presumably, and 914 is not going to get you very far. But for someone who does not have any type of benefits, that's going to be a game changer. So our hope is that if someone is able to get benefits, perhaps they're able to continue their employment. They're able to get a more robust health insurance, then get into housing and treatment and supportive services, and then eventually get on their way to resiliency and recovery. And eventually, hopefully, if they are ready, they will be able to go off of benefits and go back into the workforce. However, if folks need it for their entire life, that is certainly something that they're able to maintain. The other thing that many people do not realize is that Social Security offers many increased educational and employment opportunities. I could have an entire week's training on the work incentives that Social Security offers. We won't, but there are so many work incentives that are available. And what SOAR has also found is that when we are able to get folks on benefits, especially prior to them discharging from a jail or hospital, it is going to decrease adverse outcomes such as incarcerations and hospitalizations because they have that income and presumably, hopefully, a place to live as well. Now, states and communities can also benefit from this. So SSI, not only are we bringing in cash benefits to our communities, we are also getting folks off the state and local assistance and onto federal benefits. So healthcare providers can recoup the cost of uncompensated care, and states and local communities, through something called the Interim Reimbursement Agreement, or IRA, can recoup the cost of services rendered if the state or community provides general assistance or any type of cash support. And that benefit is paid once someone is approved. Their back payment, not their check moving forward, but their back payment will go back to the state for services rendered, which is a way to not only stabilize the individual, but also offer some, the community is able to kind of get back some of that money that they were able to put out initially. All right, so let's talk a little bit about who a SOAR applicant is. So again, a SOAR applicant is going to be someone who is homeless or at risk of homelessness. We use a very broad definition of the term at risk of homelessness. So if someone is living in your shelter, doubled up, a permanent supportive housing, if they are living in Section 8, if your agency is supporting their housing, they are considered at risk of homelessness, because if your agency were to go away tomorrow, the applicant would presumably not be able to maintain stable housing, and they may be at risk or be homeless. So homeless or at risk, this is going to be someone who has a severe disability who is not able to advocate for themselves. And you, the SOAR caseworker or that agency, you are going to be the lead on this application, working in collaboration with the applicant. But this is not for someone who can advocate for themselves, who is able to drive this. These are really for the hardest to serve applicants. However, we never necessarily want to turn someone away. So this is where we have the applicant self-help guide, and we have options for kind of warm handoffs and referrals if someone isn't eligible for SOAR. And I do just want to point out what Helen said in the chat. Yes, this definition of what SOAR is, so who SOAR can serve, is different from how HUD views homelessness for these purposes. And it's different from how Social Security views homelessness. But for our purposes, we wanted to be as expansive as possible with who we are able to serve through SOAR. All right, so let's talk a little bit about kind of what SOAR is and the critical components. So you may have, if you've seen me present before, you probably have heard me say that if I could describe SOAR in one word, that word is going to be proactive. What we are not doing is we are not just sending our applicants down to Social Security and telling them to apply on their own. The onus of the application process is going to be on the caseworker. The caseworker is the one driving this application, not the applicant. Because we know that our applicants who are homeless or at risk of homelessness are not able to effectively navigate this bureaucratic system. So when I used to do applications down at my local homeless shelter here in Albany, New York, and what I would say and what was very true was that my applicants never had to walk into Social Security. They never had to talk with Social Security on the phone until they've been approved. And that's the power of SOAR. We are working on behalf of the applicant, but we are guiding the process. So we've identified 5 critical components that make this helpful. Or make this be able to happen. First is serving as the applicant's 1696 representative. This is an appointment of representative form. It is not a legal appointment. It does not make you liable for the decision. But what it allows you to do is to communicate with SSA and DDS on the applicant's, or BDD in Pennsylvania, on the applicant's behalf. We are also going to collect and submit all the applicant's medical records to ensure that Social Security and BDD are getting a robust look at the applicants. And I should back up for a second. Social Security is the one that we are all very familiar with. They take the application and they make the non-medical determination. The Bureau of Disability Determinations, BDD, that is Pennsylvania's Disability Determination Services. It's different in each state. They make the medical determination as to whether or not someone's eligible, and then they turn the decision back over to Social Security. So Social Security is really the one that does a lot of the public facing. So we're going to make sure that BDD has all of these medical records. We are going to write and submit a medical summary report, which, unlike its title, is not necessarily a summary of the medical evidence, but instead it is a summary of the functioning of the applicant. And it is so important to draw that connection between how the applicant's disabilities affect their ability to function. We are also going to obtain a co-signature by what's called an acceptable medical source, so an MD, PhD, nurse practitioner. And then what we wrote in that medical summary report is going to be considered medical evidence in the eyes of BDD. And at the end of the day, we are providing a complete application. The word SOAR, SOAR, does nothing. SOAR is an indication of the work that the caseworker has put in to provide this complete application. So that when we drop a complete application off at Social Security or mail it or fax it, they know that they do not really have to do anything except process it and move it on because it is so complete. And if there is something that is missing, we will be in touch with them on behalf of the applicant and vice versa. All right, so let's talk about some outcomes and how we know this works. I will note that these are 2022 outcomes because just this month we are wrapping up our 2023 outcomes, and I can give you a slight preview of it. So before we do this, I want to talk about the traditional outcomes. So traditionally, if someone were to go in and apply for Social Security disability benefits, they don't need to be homeless or at risk of homelessness. This is just in general. The likelihood they would be approved is about 25 to 29%. If someone is homeless or at risk of homelessness and they go into Social Security and apply, the likelihood that they would be approved is about 10 to 15%. So with the SOAR process on initial outcomes, we see an average approval rate of about 68%, and that's holding steady for this year. Now I'm going to get to the Pennsylvania outcomes in a second because Pennsylvania just blows this out of the water, and we'll talk about this in a minute. So we have seen cumulatively, since we've been collecting outcomes, we see about a 65% approval rate, which is absolutely amazing. There we go. So we also see that the average Medicaid reimbursement is going to be upwards of $25,000 per individual. We see a general assistance reimbursement of about $1,700. Retroactive back payments for individuals, so individuals getting any back payments is also really high. And again, money being brought into the local economies. Now, we also have our SOAR superstar states. And if you will notice, Pennsylvania is the #1 state, and they have been for many years. So the average approval rate for the top 10 states is around 81%. And there are some, you have to have at least 24 decisions. You can't just have one decision for the state and it be an approval and you're in the top 10, but you need to have at least 24 decisions. And Pennsylvania has been one of the highest approval rates for the states and are kind of really leading that pack. And how they get these approval rates is by doing high quality applications and really ensuring that those critical components are being used. Okay, let's talk about Pennsylvania specific outcomes, because while we have amazing outcomes for the state of Pennsylvania, I do want to provide some context for this. So these are last year's outcomes. Last year, the state of Pennsylvania as a whole had 346 applications. The overall approval rate for the entire state was 91% in an average of 102 days. This is absolutely amazing. 91% approval rate on initial application. If you can think to folks in your communities or being served by your continuum and think about how long they are waiting or if they are getting denied, if they're not upwards of 91% approval rate, this is your indication to do SOAR. But I do want to provide a caveat. Most of these applications are coming from Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. We really lack SOAR in the middle of the state and within the balance of state as a whole. So of those 346 applications, Philadelphia saw 218 of them. The Pittsburgh area and Allegheny as a whole saw 113. The remaining outcomes, and I think my math might not exactly be mathing with this, but only about 45 to 50. Those other areas are going to be like Montgomery County, Delaware County, things like that. So we are really looking to expand SOAR throughout the state so that we can see more effective benefits applications coming from the central and balance of state. Most of the people who we get calls from, because people do call the TA center looking for referrals, do come from areas that are not necessarily on the kind of borders of the state. So what we're looking to do here is grow SOAR, continue to grow SOAR, especially throughout the balance of state, establish some local leads who are able to take the lead on SOAR implementation in their communities, if possible, to gain additional funding for SOAR, and then increase the number of staff overall that are assisting with applications. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how to become involved, and then we'll do some community examples. So at its core, SOAR is an online course. We provide 2 online courses that are how people become trained in the SOAR process. It is online because not only is it able for us to standardize SOAR across the entire country, and then the TA center and local leads can provide follow-up. It also comes with 20 free CEUs through NASW, which can be used for licensure, and it is completely free and self-guided. There is also a practicum component, which I don't have the pictures here, but what this means is that caseworkers will complete an actual application for a mock applicant. So this is why the course takes 20 hours, because you will complete 5 SSA forms and write a medical summary report for the applicant that you are assigned, whether it be Mike or Colette in the adult course or Tiffany or Marshall in the child course. So one of the things I really like to point out, and this was the link that I shared in the chat towards the beginning of the presentation, is fully understanding when you have folks trained what you are stepping into and becoming involved with. Nothing worries me more than when I see an agency come through or a directive that says everyone must be trained, because it's really important to note how and kind of think about how you're planning to set aside staff time to do applications. Each SOAR application takes 20 to 40 hours over the course of 60 days. Now, that may seem like a lot, and it is a lot of staff time. But the 20 hours will be if your applicant is easy to get in touch with, they're good at making appointments, maybe they live in your permanent supportive housing. 40 hours may be if you need to do a lot of outreach or if they're more challenging to engage. And it's not as if you're going to sit down and do an application 1 week, 40 hours, and you're done. The components really are done over the course of 60 days. And the more you do SOAR assisted applications, it's like a muscle. The more you work it, the easier it will become and the more refined it will become. So doing more of them allows folks to be able to do them faster and better. But we want to make sure that everyone understands the expectations of the training, and that once you are trained, not only are you committing to doing the applications, but also tracking your outcomes and really being involved in the SOAR community. But again, I want you to think about the time commitment on the front end versus the time commitment on the back end. The average, if someone is denied on initial application, they then go to reconsideration, which on average takes about 2 to 3 months to get a decision. Most applications just historically are denied on reconsideration. They will then go into what's known as an administrative law judge hearing, or this third level of application and appeal. The average wait time for an ALJ just to get scheduled at this point is over a year. And in many cities, and I don't think Pittsburgh and Philly are unique to this, in many cities, it can be upwards of 18 months. In New York, in certain areas of New York, it's at 24 months right now. And then hopefully they'll be approved. If not, then they're going to go on to another level of appeal. So it's important to think about, would I rather spend 100 or 20 to 40 hours now and get a decision in 100 days at 91% likelihood of being approved, or have someone wait 2+ years for benefits? And in that time, our agency and our community is still serving these applicants. And you may still be serving them after you get them on benefits, but at least they have that stable source of income. All right, so we're at about a little over the halfway point. I just want to stop here and answer any questions that you guys have about the process before we start to talk about community implementation and involvement.
There's been nothing in the chat.
Okay, and oh, here's a question in here. Will you be getting the PowerPoint? Yes, I will send it over to Helen, and I assume you can distribute it.
We're going to share it through all the normal ways. So how you get them in an email after the training, posted on the website, along with the recording.
Are PSY social workers trained in SOAR? I'm not sure what PSY social workers are, but if you wanted to find that, I do think that's a good. State Correctional Institute. Short answer, no. I don't believe that currently we do not have a in-reach or outreach institutional correctional workers trained in this. I want to bring up something that is probably that you guys are probably thinking about, if not going to be asking it. The number one question I always get is, this is great, how do I refer? And I'll be very frank that if you are in Philly and Pittsburgh, you might be able to refer, but otherwise there really is no referral for SOAR. When you become SOAR trained, you are committing to working with your applicants, the clients within your agency. There is no expectation that you are going to accept referrals from outside. If you are able to, that is wonderful. However, the likelihood that someone will be able to do that is not very high. So oftentimes we'll say, well, this agency has SOAR trained staff, but what you don't know is their staff commitment, their time to do applications. So this is really what we hope is that agencies will see this as a way to enhance their current services and have staff SOAR trained. Now, SOAR is a requirement for many of the, or you get points for if you have SOAR trained staff. Training does not equal doing. There are thousands of people in the state of Pennsylvania that are trained, but we're only seeing about 400 applications a year. So just because someone is trained does not mean they are doing the applications. And that's why it's so important to talk about the time commitment and the expectations associated with that. To get back to your question, I would love to have folks in the correctional institutions trained in order to exit and get folks on benefits prior to exiting. We have had conversations. Not something that we have currently. So good questions.
Abby, I just want to follow up. So 2 things. Luckily, we have someone from the Department of Corrections presenting right after you. So this is perfect timing. But also, I have a follow-up question, actually, that I genuinely don't know. So regarding the training, yes, folks get like quote unquote credit in their COC applications when they say they're SOAR certified or if they have them on staff. However, there's a caveat that on the application, it asks if anyone has been certified within the last 24 months. So we have some people that are certified, but not within the last 24 months, because like, let's say they've been at the agency for 5 years. So is there any kind of research or something that could kind of keep someone like, I don't know, active for the purposes of like HUD counting them?
So this is a very interesting question because the SOAR TA Center does not certify folks. We provide a certificate of completion, and we do not require that you need to be re-up that certificate. There are some states that have a certification process. Pennsylvania is not one of them. So the quick answer is that you would need to retake the course, but there's no hard and fast, because we don't provide that certificate of completion, or we provide a certificate of completion, but we do not have a recertification process via the SOAR TA Center. They can retake the course. If you took the course 5 years ago and you were just coming back into it, our recommendation would be to review the course and then go to an online course review session. However, that's something that we definitely need to talk with HUD more and look into a little bit more, because as Callie's question, there is no expiration date on the certificate because we don't certify people. SOAR is not a certification. You get a certificate of completion. So there's a little bit of semantics happening here with that. But I think for the purposes of this application, they will look to see if you have taken the SOAR online course within the past 2 years. And if it was 5 years ago, they can either accept that 5 years ago, or you would need to retake the course.
Great, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so Sarah said, we DOC Community Corrections have counties that will not accept applications for those in our facilities. How would this work with it? So I'm not quite sure what you mean by who will not accept them. If you're talking about Social Security will not accept applications unless there is a stated release date, and that is needed in order to process the application. So when someone is looking to apply for benefits, they will need to have that release date. Many Social Security, and this is something that the TA Center can work with, we have established a memorandum of understanding with Social Security so that they can apply 30, 60, 90 days prior to release so that we can hopefully get those benefits in place. But I'm not quite sure if you could clarify kind of what you mean by accept applications. Social Security is national. So in theory, if you had that MOU, they had a release date, you would be able to apply prior to release for these individuals. And then once they get released, and if they are going to another county, they would just need to change their address with the Social Security office. All right, let's keep going, and then we'll have ample time for Q&A at the end as well. Okay, so let's talk about how some communities have done SOAR and collaborated successfully. So we've been talking about this. Successful outcomes occur when SOAR trained staff are implementing the model correctly. They're working with eligible applicants. They're providing ongoing support. They're collaborating with SSA and DDS effectively, and communication is maintained among SOAR providers. So we want to make sure that we're not duplicating services, especially in this time where services can be so scarce and everyone's overwhelmed. So making sure we know who's on first and who's doing the applications. We also want to make sure that everyone in the community is involved. We don't want a SOAR caseworker who is trained to become an island, or, that they are just the only one doing it. It's important to recognize how you can be involved with it. So, because the person in the middle, the one that's represented kind of by that circular SOAR bird, they're not just someone who is in need of benefits. They're living in our community. They're getting seen by our treatment providers. They may be in our educational systems, or they may be within our working within our legal systems. They could be a veteran. So asking yourself, how can we make sure that everyone is involved in this process as much as possible? And again, we want to focus on the critical components. So this will include regular communication with the applicant. You cannot sit down and do a SOAR application in 1 day, 1 week, or even 1 month. This is regular communication with the applicant. It is an extensive engagement process because we are working to tell Social Security how the applicant's disability affects their ability to work and function. So we won't know that unless we get to know the applicant so that we can clearly make that link. And I can't emphasize enough how effective communication between SSA and DDS is so crucial to this process. Serving as the SSA 1696 allows you to do that. So when you are serving with this, I can call up SSA and say, hey, I dropped off an application for John Smith. Do you know who the claims representative is assigned to the case? Yes, let me have their extension. I'm going to regularly follow up with that claims representative. Once the case is transferred over to BDD, I'm going to be calling them. Is there anything else you need with this process? We are going to try to avoid consultative exams. Those consultative exams, often known as IMAs as well, are not part of the process. They are only part of the process if Social Security and BDD do not have enough evidence to support the claim. With SOAR, we're providing that evidence, or we are going to work to get it. We are also, again, going to write that medical summary report and make sure it's signed by that acceptable medical source. And at the end of the day, we are working to provide complete and quality applications. So let's talk about funding. Dedicated funding is not required to begin and grow your SOAR initiative, but it's definitely helpful. I won't lie and say it's not helpful to have dedicated funding, but it absolutely is. But funding for dedicated caseworkers is a goal. What really frustrates us is when we hear, well, we wish we could do this, but we don't have funding. Can you give us funding? And I wish I could. I wish I could give everyone funding. But there are unique ways to grow and sustain SOAR without that initial dedicated funding. And success early on. So success by doing applications will result in increased funding. It is hard to propose, hey, we want to do this if we don't necessarily have the outcomes. But if you can say in the past year, we've helped 20 people and we have a 98% approval rate on initial application, an average of 3 months, that's really powerful. Those are absolutely lives changed, and that can be replicated. So all 50 states do participate in SOAR in some capacity, and many do them by reallocating resources. And I know that it is easy for me to say, like, just reallocate and see how it works, but it really does help. Let's say you have 10 caseworkers that are working with applicants and they're in some capacity. It might not be beneficial to train all 10. Instead, let's talk about training 2 caseworkers. And then we can kind of shift caseload so that those are the 2 that are expert in SOAR, they're doing more, and then they can do more applications more quickly. Then those other 8 are going to know how to support, and they are going to pick up more of, let's say, the case manager of record work while the other 2 are doing SOAR. Securing funding through federal grants and state grants and foundation funding. A lot of grants, especially grants that come through SAMHSA, they will not say SOAR and do SOAR And here's funding directly for SOAR. But what it will say is innovative solutions to end homelessness, or how can we help individuals who are unhoused? And that is really where SOAR can shine in many ways. Let's get some dedicated funding through some of those grants if and when they become available again. And they will always be available on our SOARworks website. And we do send out a news blast. Also, working to establish collaborations with hospitals, legal settings, and other kind of specialty funding groups. So we have worked, for instance, with SSVF providers. We have many legal settings that have SOAR trained staff. And those kind of funding angles that are outside of the traditional homeless or at risk of homelessness funding streams can also be very helpful. So last year alone, we had about 330 full-time dedicated SOAR positions, and this is kind of the breakdown in how they are funded. And just last year, 20 states reported new funding for SOAR. So it's definitely happening even in these times of uncertainty and whatnot over the past couple of years. We are still hiring, seeing really good work from them. So some examples of kind of really good self-sustained SOAR initiatives is Virginia. So Virginia is an example of a state that does have a certification process. And what this means is that once someone passes the SOAR online course, they will then attend a Virginia session that talks about specifically how we do SOAR in Virginia. Who are your local leads? Who are your supports? Who are your SSA and DDS contacts? And then local leads are there to provide that support and do the quality review. Virginia is also a great example of a community that, or a state that has set up SOAR within their state hospitals. So their discharge planners at their state hospitals are involved in the process, as well as many of their DOC discharge planners. There is also dedicated funding through the community behavioral health centers for SOAR providers, and their state path workers are also required to do SOAR applications as part of their existing work. So I mentioned general assistance. That's kind of the cash time limited benefits. But I just wanted to show that through that interim assistance reimbursement, sorry, I said it was interim reimbursement assistance. So through the IAR, what we typically see is that when someone is approved, the average person is kind of paying back the state about $1,700. So oftentimes, at least I know in New York, that as soon as you are getting that general assistance, you will need to apply for benefits. And oftentimes it's done very quickly and not exactly in the best way, which leads to denials. And someone is then in the process for multiple years. So by letting kind of the county know that we are working with the person, they are going through the SOAR process, this enables them to get paid back much more quickly. North Carolina is also a really good example of a state that has combined foundation, hospital, local, and federal state, and they have a certification process as well. And essentially what they did is that each state, or each county rather, was required, if they wanted to become involved in the SOAR process, to figure out how to fund a half-time position at minimum, preferably a full, but definitely a half, because they recognize the need for someone to be able to focus in on this. And the results speak for themselves. 76% approval rate, I think around 120 days. And to this date, they have 31 full-time, 8 part-time or volunteer, and this is really spreading over 18 of their counties, which is excellent. Another thing to consider if you have interns or AmeriCorps Vista members is to work with them to see if you can incorporate SOAR into university level BSW or MSW casework. If you can get a MSW or BSW intern for a year and get them trained quickly and find support for them, they could do a lot of SOAR applications. And this would be a great way for not only them to get experience, but for also your agency to be able to get outcomes to then show that it would be great to use those for potential funding applications. Similarly, with AmeriCorps and AmeriCorps Vista, AmeriCorps State can do the work. AmeriCorps Vista could do a lot of the coordination. But again, just ideas. to see how you can increase your capacity for SOAR. And then lastly, look into investing within your peer workforce and your individuals with lived expertise. If you are able to get individuals and peers trained in SOAR, perhaps they do the full application, perhaps they do the engagement piece. Take a look. And one of the things that we're doing at the TA Center is reaching out to every single peer certification body within the country and figuring out if SOAR can be involved with this. Peer certification boards, and talking with them about integrating SOAR. But peers have such a value, especially when it comes to the SOAR process. So please think about incorporating that if that's something they are interested in. All right, so a lot of slides wrapping up, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So SOAR is absolutely worth the effort. Timely access to Social Security disability benefits changes lives. It enhances your community, especially when you are helping those most vulnerable. And please feel free to reach out to myself. I serve as the liaison to the state of Pennsylvania. The state team lead, Courtney Iorio, I love her so much. She left just for a new position. We absolutely wish her well. Last week, Kayla Shiflett is serving in the state team lead role right now until they get hired. However, Kayla is heads of many things. So please feel free to reach out to me in the interim. And then there may also be local leads in your community that would be able to support. I'm going to put my contact information up here, and then they'll be in the slides, and I'll put them in the chat as well. So I'm going to take this off, stop sharing, and then let's see. I know another one. Okay. You're in our community correction center. It doesn't apply. Those with nurses do not have a release date because they need a home plan to be released. Okay, so yes, Sarah, that's a great follow-up. So essentially saying that people within their community correction center do not. So Social Security is able to, while they may not have a specific release date, Social Security is often able to work with you to establish a potential release date. So we did this once in a state hospital that had this kind of same issues. They needed to be able to have a place to go home to before they could be released. So what we ended up doing was talking with Social Security about how we could put their next parole hearing of that potential date of release. The medical decision with BDD will last for a year. So as long as the potential releases within reach, it's not as if they are going to stay within our community correction center for years and years. I think Social Security can absolutely work with us to process the application. There's obviously nuances with this, but I don't think it's a huge barrier to getting Social Security applications done, especially if it's going to be able to facilitate someone being able to be successful and leaving. That's definitely something that we hear is like, how do we get a release date? But Social Security also knows that that is something, a barrier that many folks have. So they're willing to kind of work with that. So what do you know about, what do you think of citizens' disability? I am not familiar with that term. I went to the Google machine. Is the nation's leading social justice advocacy group. I am actually not familiar with citizens' disability, so I couldn't speak to it, but I am certainly going to look into it more after this call. So follow up with me. I was also, as I'm presenting, I'm thinking more about, Kelly, kind of your question about the expiration. I'm going to talk with our project director to see if we can get more guidance on kind of what we're doing with that in the interim, since our certificate of completion does not have that expiration date. And if I hear anything more or we have more, I will follow up.
That's great. As far as HUD is concerned, on the project application level, it's very black and white. It's just yes or no. Like, you check it off if you've had someone within the last 24 months. that's been certified. So, and in the narratives, people can say we have SOAR certified staff, or people that's what they call them, and generally is SOAR certified.
Mhm.
Um,
And I do think that if you have completed applications so our rule of thumb is that if you haven't completed applications in the last year since your training, you should take the SOAR online course again. You should attend a online course review session. I would say, from my perspective, that if you are doing applications and tracking outcomes, that would constitute being SOAR certified for the past 2 years. If you're not, then I think that begs a bigger question of, are we doing SOAR just for the training, or how can we actually implement the process to help people get on benefits more quickly?
Sure. So that might be something that we work with grantees on, like at
Yep.
DMA. Okay. So not seeing any more questions come through the chat. I'm going to stop recording. Hold on one moment. Where am I? Stop recording.